And
I'm going to
and
record there.
okay. And
Okay.
then we agreed that this time we'll try to discuss the Franciscan identity.
Mhm.
Okay, well, identity is a difficult issue, as you know, because identity, if we think about our own identity, what we think about identity, and obviously there are many issues that come or become part of the identity. And when you talk to psychologists, they always say that the identity is like a tree where you have roots, you have trunk, solid and strong, and then you have branches. And the further up you go, everything is more flexible. The leaves and branches, they're more open to being moved by the wind. And obviously, that means that identity is formed by many issues. But I think if you ask yourself, of course, many of you would say that your identity, apart from the community you're becoming a part of, or you feel, because identity is also a matter of choice in many aspects. You know, of course, you have certain factors being given to you, but then you make a certain selection which are more or less important in your life. And I think we probably all notice that if we want to really understand the identity, we need to go into the past and look into the past that formed us, and then through the past have a vision of future. And I think the same is with Franciscan identity, because on one hand, obviously, we are Franciscans. So our identity is all that constitutes Franciscan identity, and that is common for the entire Franciscan family. So the first order, the second order, the third order. And obviously, the heritage of Saint Francis, the writings of Saint Francis, all that is, and then all the literature, Franciscan literature, because it's all the sources that come after Saint Francis, and the saints also, which are the milestones in our life. But then we might say, what makes us different inside the Franciscan family, because we're secular Franciscans. And now, obviously, people might look at us, you know, in a different way. And I see it sometimes when we have visitations with our fraternities. Sometimes also when you talk to priests, because, you know, when you have an elderly fraternity, so sometimes we are being treated as sort of the pensionaries club, or so sort of a prayer club, elderly people coming to pray together, having coffee, tea together, maybe eat something, just like things like that, and sometimes we are not given this serious treatment on our understanding, but in fact we are different from other orders, um, the first and the second, as a third order, because our identity, in a way, predates St. Francis. Because obviously, as we are called the Franciscan secular order, or as in the medieval times, we used to have different names in different sources that appear in Latin. So, apart from the Tertius Ordo, Beati Francisci, which is the third order, which about the term I will talk later, the history of this term, because it also predates Saint Francis. But then the penitentes Beati Francisci, so the or fratres et soreres de penitentia. And that was at the beginning when the name of St. Francis was not added, and that's goes to an earlier tradition of penitentiary orders that existed also before St. Francis, and to one of them, St. Francis, actually, or to the movement, maybe, because it was not an ordered movement in a way, not an organization, as we might say, but rather a movement. St. Francis joined. at the beginning after his conversion, obviously, at least for 2 years, before setting up slowly the first order. He was part of the order of the penitents, and he was dressed in the way that was typical for the penitents. And that's what he was doing when he was rebuilding the church, physically, right? So it's very often in our life that we have a certain symbolism, but at the beginning we don't understand. So when he was called to rebuild the church, at the very beginning, he just decided to do it physically. So basically, he became a builder. He was just trying to a mason in a way, in a sense that he was just putting stone to stone and physically rebuilding, constructing the church. Whereas obviously the call was more symbolic, and only later part of the life proved the real meaning of the call. But then when we start thinking about the order of penitence, that's where our roots are, in the order of penitence. So obviously, I think very often we have not a very nice impression hearing the word penitence, right? Because we might think the penitents are just the people who basically torture their bodies and expose themselves into very tough situations, maybe flagellations or, not eating anything. So basically, they're the ones who sometimes might be considered being a little bit crazy because of that. But I think we have to understand that the common meaning of penitence, as most people whom you meet in the street would understand, is very secondary and later in date than the original meaning of penitence, as it is from the scriptures. And even with all these efforts by the church to bring in to the common sense the original meaning of the penitence, it's quite difficult, because people keep this pictures of men walking and hitting themselves or torturing themselves. Whereas the real tradition for the penitence, or the meaning, we should look into the word that is being used in the scriptures in Greek and in Latin. And in Greek, we have the word metanoia. Metanoia, which is the change of mind. A change of mind, and also a change of mind with a reflection that something that was before the change was not good, and the change is for good. We also have the Latin translation for Greek metanoia is penitentia, with OE as a diphthong, or conversio. Conversio, which is return to God, right? Or same as metanoia, which is the change of mind back to God. And obviously, we have a number of these calls for return to the primitive justice, and the primitive in sense of primary, not in sense of being simple, of course, yes, but not primitive in the negative meaning, but as the one that was at the very beginning, the early relations with God, that were the relations before the falling of the human nature. And obviously we have many calls for this conversion to God, and change of attitude, change of behavior, change of habits, and also look at the preachings of St. John the Baptist. Same, it's the call for the change. The change that is, this is also an interesting part, because obviously metanoia as the change is a very internal act, an act of our soul and mind that nobody from outside can really see it. So at that time, very often it was accompanied by some external signs, like the baptism with St. John the Baptist, that was marking the rebirth and the rebirth for the new life, the life of change, different life. But then also look in the Old Testament, you also have in that tradition many outside markings of this change, which is well noticed if you have the passage on King David after the death of Urias, when he actually, then the son died, and he is dressing in the special dress, the dress of penitence, and the ash and other elements that sign the time of reflection, but also the time of somehow this way of being sorry for the previous life. So it's not only a reflection that now I changed, but it's a reflection that the way I lived so far, I have lived so far, has been wrong. I regret. I want to live in another way, right? That's the true penitence. And notice that you also have, I was going through breviary, and at a certain point in one of the hours of the Lent, I noticed there is the fragment of the book by Prophet Joel. Notice, I don't have the English translation, but you can easily find it, I think, even in your own Bible. It's the chapter 2, verses 12, 13, when basically the prophet says that turn to me with all your hearts by fast, by tears, and by cry. But tear, however, your hearts, not your clothes. So that's a call that the penitence is the internal act.
Yeah.
It's inside your heart, not outside. Yes, yes.
Can you repeat the
quotation? It's
from
Prophet Joel, chapter 2,
yeah,
verses 12, 13, 1, 2, 1, 3.
Yeah.
Okay, and then notice also the I also don't have the English Bible in front of me. There is Saint Paul, the letter to Romans,
Yeah.
chapter 12, verses 1, 2, and that is basically the Saint Paul calls to give the bodies as the sacrifice to God. And through the change of your mind, going to what is pleasant to God from what is worldly. You can read it. It's I have a Latin translation, a Latin text, and it's interesting because it is the word used is ut exhibatis corpora vestra hostiam viventem, which means that you expose your bodies as the living hostia, right? So it is the living offer. So your life becomes a living offer, the living sacrifice, as the sacrifice of the Jesus on the cross. So I think the word hostia is very interesting. As you know, the hostia is what we get during the Eucharist, right?
Yes.
The most holy body of Christ. So that's where we are called to be sanctified. And I think that is somehow the direction that is given in the scriptures for the life of penitence. Now, where this tradition of penitence comes from, it is a very old tradition from the beginning of the history of the church. We know from some sources of the 2nd century already that it was difficult. There was this tendency, even if you look at the Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, well, he became Christian just shortly before death, because obviously they were afraid that since they're being purified from sins by baptism, so when they sin after baptism, so what to do after, how to repay for that. And obviously that fact was from the very beginning, and the way of repaying was actually to do a public penitence. And we know it from ancient sources that people who, after baptism, the Christians who became sinners, obviously with grave sins, they were exposed to public penitence. And that public penitence was a bit like in what we have in the Old Testament tradition. So they had a special way of being dressed. They refrained from certain things. They were not allowed to hold or to do certain actions. And the tendency to make the burden even bigger, so not to allow to get public functions, and maybe with the idea not to fall into the sin again. But anyway, we know the literature or the sources of the 4th century have quite a number of these indictions. So the things that were prohibited from those who were in public penitence. And this idea of public penitence becomes less and less evident in Europe with the coming of the Irish monks. And that is mostly 6th and the 7th century when they introduced the private penitence. And that became more and more. So you see why I'm talking about it, because this is this tendency that I mentioned with Prophet Joel. So from outside symbols of your penitence into your internal act. So more attention giving to your internal act of penitence rather than outside signs of your change of life. I think we are also a good example, and we also follow this trend from the medieval times where the penitence was shown outside in many signs towards what we do now when we basically don't manifest our penitence. We do it in private. We don't even have any special dress for the penitence right now. That's an internal fact. We only give, or we follow the tradition, the Bible tradition, that the penitence, your internal act outside, may be manifested by fast or by mercy, or by prayer, or by giving gifts to others who are in need, right? So these are the outside manifestations that we follow, and they have biblical tradition. But then in the late antiquity, what happened is with this whole group of people who were in public penitence, the tendency grew that people voluntarily accepted the life of penitence because they believed it's the right way. And obviously, that trend continued into the 11th century and 12th century as well. And we also have to understand that it was a very way of being devoted and practicing Christian life. But we have to understand that these people there lived in the environment when most of them were not able to read Bible or other scriptures or the fathers of the church. Only the education and ability to read was restricted only to the ones who were educated. Like late antiquity, basic education had relatively on a level, let's say. The medieval ages with changes that appeared in the early medieval Europe, this education was a problem. And obviously, as you know, the issues, the political issues after the Charles the Great, with the reform of the church, which was also intended to limit the impact of secular authorities on the church. This movement of penitence became a very important way of accepting a devoted life. And there were different forms in the late antiquity and early medieval times. There were different forms of penitence in this penitent movement that were practiced. And among them, there were such ways as living, accepting the life near some church and doing some work for the church and the surroundings of the church. So we used to, this way, the oblates came to life, or there were ladies who chose the life by the monasteries or by the churches and devoted themselves into service around. They were devote, or the pilgrimage, which was also a source of penitence, because it was a way of exposing to many adventures and unknown future, and a special way of trusting. It is even today, I think, with people who undertake the pilgrimage by foot. Very often it's an enormous effort. So obviously it has to be some kind of faith in God, that in the moments of weakness, they're going to be assisted by the Spirit and by God. So that is different forms that came in. There were also eremites, so the ones who lived in solitary places. There were also the recluses, or the ones who were living in the closed area, ladies especially, who practiced their penitence this way. And there were also the converted men and women who lived in the family, and they tried to live in a better way with the changed habits. And that's what basically gave the background to what we practice now. Now, when we come into the third order, what is this third order? So why the third order? Because, as you know, third order is not only, as a term, is not only typical for the Franciscans. Right now, we have also a number of structures that are similar. The ones who have the medieval tradition are also the third order with the Dominicans and the Carmelites. They have their third order. But as the movement of penitence became very spread in medieval Europe, especially in the 12th century, then we also have sources talking about the order of Saint Jacob of Compostela in Spain. There was a military order with the Reconquista in Spain from the Muslims of the territory. And then the sources mentioned that the Saint Jacob order was actually composed of three parts, which were the knights who had families and sons, the knights who were chevalier and they had no families, so they could take the vows of chastity, and then the priests who were responsible for the spiritual service and also education of the children of the married knights who were part of the order. So these married knights were the third order. So that's why there were three orders. So that's, we know from Compostela. Now, when we discuss about this movement in medieval times, especially 11th century, it was also all these issue of reform in the church was a reform of the monastic life, as you know, with Saint Bernard of Clairvaux and with the Cistercian changes. But these changes consolidated the authority in the church, but well, still the sedentary monastic life. Whereas there was a need for these penitents. The penitents, we know also the 11th century example of the order of humiliates. So these were the in Lombardia who had the order of people who practiced penitence in their homes, and they sort of made their communities based on their common activities. And also there was this because, as I said, the reading of the scriptures was basically restricted to those who were able to read. So the very common way of devotion was by this penitence, and there was a need for also wandering preachers. So the 12th century is full of these penitent preachers who wandered around, moved from one place to the others, and make their homilies. And there was a substitute for reading. People who could not read at least listened to what they were saying, and they were preaching metanoia, or the change of mind, just as the biblical prophets, right? Yet the issue in the already in the 12th and the beginning of the 13th century was that somehow this, since it was not codified, so we had preachers who were among the penitents who were Orthodox, and we started to have preachers who were diversing from the Orthodox faith into a more attractive ways of thinking, more philosophical, Gnostic. We had Cathars who spread very quickly, and we had Valdens who also started preaching, became critical of the church. And here, I think it was a historical moment and the need for St. Francis and St. Dominic, and they came on the right time. And St. Francis at the beginning didn't want to have a regular order. He knew what the regular order was, as you know from his life, because he spent time with the Benedictines, and he was a friend with the Benedictines, and he knew the rule and the way he was serving as the one who was delivering water with them. So he knew this kind of life of the monks. He wanted to avoid it because obviously he was a penitent, so he was moving or staying in the solitary places or moving from one to the other, living in a very simple and begging way. But then obviously with the needs of the church and the situation with the heresies, the orders, the first order became a regular order. And then the third order became important and had its own place in the and the role in the church. And here we come into the fact that this relation between Saint Francis and the old tradition of penitence produced that Saint Francis gave much attention to this penitent persons, and as a result, we have two letters to all the faithful, as you know. One is the part of our current rule, and St. Francis composed them. And even from when we look at this idea of metanoia, so we have this anniversary right now, St. Francis' death, and we look into his testament. And when we read his testament, obviously we discussed it last time, so my impression was that one of the very strong messages was the faithfulness to the church. But then the other clear message that we read from them is that St. Francis divides his own life into two periods. The periods when he was ruled by ego and the sinful life, and then the period when he started practicing penitence. And he uses the Latin term facere penitentia, which is to do penitence or to practice more. Maybe it's a better way, because which means that you need to live with this change of mind which you want to introduce into your life. And then if your change of mind is sincere, this change of mind will produce the fruits of the penitence, and the fruit of the penitence is the misericordia to our fellows, right? So the change of mind, which opens you into being more. Well, I'm just missing the English word. More of the
More
yes,
loving.
yeah, loving, like misericordia, which is like the yes, for people. Now, when we come into, obviously, Saint Francis came and started to make this particular interest, and as you know, the first rule, which we celebrated, was given to us in 1221. It was Memoriale Propositum, which is the first rule, and it's very interesting to read it. There is an Italian book written by a Capuchin friar who for many years was assistant to OFS, and that is the title. It's Antonio Fregona, who is the author. Antonio Fregona, Capuchin friar, and he wrote, the book is entitled L'Ordine Francescano Secolare, so the Franciscan secular order, and the subtitle is Storia, Legislazione, Spiritualità. So it's history, legislation, and spirituality. And it's a history of the order from the very beginning until current days, which also includes these parts of identity resulting or coming from the order of penitence. And he gives an annex, which is very nice at the very end of the book, where he grouped all the legislative texts or the rules, historical rules. And you can also here read, unfortunately it's in Italian, but you can read the Memoriale Propositi. The discussion is obviously the rule was not written by St. Francis. You have it here. Yes,
we have it in Danish. Yeah.
Excellent.
The four rules that we have had, we have it in just.
Well, so you just can read it. Excellent. We have also in Polish a history of Franciscan order, and we also have the historical rules there. But then the discussion is, since it only refers to brothers and sisters of penitence, so some suggested that maybe it was directed not only to the Franciscans. Most people now believe that it was most probably directed to the penitents of St. Francis, or the ones that were followed Franciscan tradition. Yeah, nevertheless, the important part of it is obviously that it gives certain prescriptions and gives the first structures of the institutions. So the acceptance, it gives the authorities that there is a minister and people who assist him. Then it also gives some provision for the way of being dressed. And what is very clear, apart from details, that the way of being dressed has to be humble. So not expensive clothes, not expensive fabrics, but a humble way. And obviously prescriptions for prayers and fasting, uh, as well as other prescriptions and duties, including behavior in the family, behavior in public, not a prohibition from carrying arms unless under some conditions, and and also there is this prohibition of giving vows in public and in private discussion, which is not the church vows, but in general of usually the discussion historically, the historians say that it was because, as you know, it was feudal. So with the feudal system, it was a vow from given to the senior, and then the senior was giving a promise of protection. Yet it seems that secular Franciscans were not that common. It was more rather elite. If we look at the numbers we have from sources, there were not big communities, but they had their position mostly in the cities. And obviously, these prohibition was directed into the or against certain duties towards the municipalities. It was the time when the municipalities supported the emperor in the conflict of the emperor with the papacy. So obviously the duties of service of in the military or the other duties that were devoted to the or certain obligations that were given by the municipal authorities. So the Franciscans, the secular Franciscans, were excluded from these duties, and it was also part of the fact that penitents were considered part or under the church jurisdiction, which we know also, or we have exemplified in the life of St. Francis. If you remember this part, when he was in quarrel with his father, and as a penitent, he was judged by the bishop, not by the civil court. So the penitents were considered religious people and under the jurisdiction of the church. Even before the Franciscan penitents, right? So obviously, even so later. Now, the rule as a legal text was probably composed by Cardinal Hugolin, the later Pope Gregory, because he was more of the legal. He was curator of the order. And obviously, he assisted St. Francis and St. Dominic, and mostly St. Francis, in many aspects, and we have already discussed that. So rather, most people think that even if Franciscans are not specifically mentioned, yet the rule concerns the Franciscans. And I think it's the right attitude to understand this text, Memoriale Propositi, as a legal text, but as a spiritual text, is the letter to the faithful. And I think it has been the right decision to make the letter of the faithful to the faithful part of our current rule, because, and that is no doubt St. Francis wrote it. And you remember this, it is about those who practice the penitence and those who don't practice the penitence, right? It has two redactions, the shorter version and the larger version. So now the second rule, which is basically more structured, it's the rule of Pope Nicholas IV, which is 1289, and basically follows many aspects, makes it a little bit more precise, but also gives us an idea that it is more of a structure, right? So we know that they gather, they have their meetings, they have their contributions, financial contributions, which are going to be collected and then redistributed among the ones who need or the poor and all that. So I think many of our current institutions that we have their roots in these two early rules. Now, when we think why we discuss all of that, because I think it is important to understand who we are, because we are in fact penitent, but the penitence inside our soul and mind, when we want to practice this change of mind, the metanoia or the conversio or the penitentia, and obviously, now we follow this trend rather to have it as an internal act rather than external act. Although we still keep tradition of certain external manifestations, like abstaining from food. We don't make this, obviously, even in the times of St. Francis, if you notice in the rules, there is nothing apart from fasting. There is nothing about other forms of maybe not harming, but making the body more or treating the body in a more harsh way. There is nothing like that. Even if we read the scriptures of St. Francis, where obviously we have to say that the attitude towards the body in St. Francis is dual. So on one hand, we have the dignity of the human body, which is very important, the dignity of the body, which is connected with the embodiment or the incarnation of the Savior, right? So the human body is the body into which the Savior incarnated. Obviously, the other aspect is the fallen nature, the fallen human nature. So with the primordial sin, and that what is in the New Testament very often mentioned, that all desires and sins come from the body. And notice St. Francis sometimes called the body brother donkey, very often in his life. But notice his attitude that he was basically forcing the body into service. So the idea of this, I don't know what to use the English word, mortification or harsh treatment to the body, was not to give pain, but rather to make the body ready to service, to accept the service at any time, and not the body to dictate that now I want to be lazy, now I want to rest. More into that. Nevertheless, St. Francis also in his writings says that basically the principle for the treatment of the body is humility, so nothing excessive, only what is really needed, and certain simplicity, so not luxury, but rather body to serve. There is also one fragment that he says that if the penitence and treatment to the body does not produce fruit in the sense of being a love to the others and being good and joyful, then all this harsh treatment of the body has no sense because it's sinful. So obviously, harsh treatment in the body and some harsh experience has relation to the suffering of the Christ on the cross, and is a very personal attitude. And it's, I would compare it to the martyrdom, which is requires a lot of maturity and really being very, very lots of reflection. And I think not everybody is mature enough for martyrdom, and that really is a very personal thing, and sometimes even for us hard to understand. But we know the martyrs, and they accept not for death because of death, but for usually for love, right? So, like we have the example of Maximilian Kolbe, who accepted his own death in place of the father of the family and the children to spare his life for his family. So the idea was to give my own life for the life of the other. So that's the essence of martyrdom, right? Same as it is from the Savior who gave his life for our sins and for our redemption. So I think we have to look at it from that perspective, that we are the ones who are not living in the, we don't escape the life of the world. We live in the world, we live in the families, as St. Francis prescribed to us. We accept certain rules, ways of living, and we are in fact living, practicing penitence in our houses as an internal act of our choice. And that's what constitutes us. And in all we do, we should go through that. And we also should notice that when secular Franciscans became important and had the role of not fighting, but creating an alternative, a strong alternative to the heretic movements. So I would say the same is with us. We need to develop ourselves. We need to work on us, on our own spirituality. We need to pray. We need to develop our spirit in order to be more into perfection and in the Franciscan way, following St. Francis. And the example is interesting. In the medieval times until the end of the 13th century, the Franciscans, or there was actually reluctance into accepting public offices. So being penitent was related with not accepting public offices. Later it changed. After the 12th century, it became quite opposite. So a number of public functions and duties were given to secular Franciscans. Why? Because of their development and their life of penitence, they were considered honest people. And as you know, from antiquity, collection of taxes, for example, was given to people who were called in the Roman times publicans. Publicanus was the tax collector, whom we know very well from New Testament, right? Tax collectors. The issue was that the system was that there were the rich people paid to the state all the amount of taxes that was due for the whole year. And then their people were moving around and gathered as much as they wished, sometimes the amount they really paid to the state, sometimes with an extra additions, depending on people. So I think late antiquity and early medieval times, public position was very often associated with an opportunity of corruption and gaining extra money. Only later, it became a service which required honesty, and obviously this reluctance to accept public offices was as a reluctance not to fall into the opportunity of corruption. Because, as you know, also, I think from your own practice, one of the ways of avoiding sins is avoiding opportunities and not giving the opportunities. So I think, so that is my reflection. Now I would like to listen what you think and how you think where your roots are in the Franciscan order and how you perceive that order right now as a club of people who are emeritus, or more as people who have certain role in life and have a certain way of life to live and give testimony to the others by this life of penitence. And also, I think it's also our role to, when we talk to people, to make them conscious that penitence is not what they think it is. It has a different meaning. It's an internal act. It's not an external act as they see from the pictures of medieval times, that these people were like the sadists who were, harshly treating their own bodies for nothing. This is a very distorted picture and very untrue picture of what penitence really is. And we are, and my friend actually said to me, it's, if we look into the first and the second and the third order, so we have the first order, which is the beggar's order, but it's an order. Then the second order is the order of prayer, and which is in the closure, right? A contemplative order. The third order is the order of penitence. So the ones who do the penitence do it in their homes, in their worldly life, but they practice penitence, as St. Francis wrote to us in the letter to the faithful. Well, I give floor to you now. If you have any questions, or we would like to discuss something, or maybe some issue to talk about. Do you have any reflection regarding it? For me, it was quite interesting to read. Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
No.
Yes, yes. Don't hesitate if you want to ask. Don't worry. Even if you don't speak English too well, just
no problem. Just wanted to turn microphone on again.
Yes.
I'm considering the word penitence.
Mm-hmm.
To me, penitence is not the ancient way, like in 1200 and something. To me, penitence is more serving other people, serving people who need it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my personal way of making penitence.
But I think it's very true, and basically in what I said, because the penitence in this ancient meaning of metanoia, change of mind, actually, as St. Francis said, it has to give fruit. If it is true change of mind, it has to produce fruit. And the positive fruit is being open to people, being joyful, being serving them, as you said. That is the fruit of the penitence. So your internal act opens you to other people, and you give them yourself to the point, as Saint Paul says, that obviously it depends on your on how you perceive certain things, but to the point, this service to the people, that you give yourself as the living hostia, as the St. Paul said to us, right? So you become a servant. Obviously, we might say that the very literary example would be Saint Maximilian Kolbe. He gave himself as a sacrifice because he gave his life for the other. But obviously, we can also do similar things in not such a serious aspects of giving life. But as you said, devoting your time into service of the others, devoting your money, your resources into helping other people, maybe devoting them to go through their harsh times, assisting them in different aspects, or sometimes even to the point, giving them peace of mind. Which is, notice, I don't know if you have this experience, but very often with the people in trouble, you will not come to solve their problems. But if you listen to them, you will give them already a big assistance. Because sometimes...
point there.
Yes.
We can't solve the problems.
Yes.
We
No.
for them. and we can listen to them and let them talk.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
then while they're talking, they maybe themselves find the solution.
Precisely,
Yeah,
precisely.
they opened up and, oh, I can do that and could do that.
Yes, yes, I fully agree precisely what you're saying. It's, but you know, not many people actually avoid it because they don't want to listen to problems of the others. You know, they don't have patience because notice that listening. I don't know if we discussed it last time, but I think it's important to say. We also had it at the chapter in when we were in Rome, and Father Fernando, the Capuchin, was actually talking about it. It's theologically, it's the very, very strong aspect of our faith, because notice the eldest prayer, which we have in the breviary on the first Vespers of Sunday, which is the old prayer of Israel, Shema Israel, listen, Israel, listen. Then, if you notice, there is this part of Isaiah with the servant who suffers, suffering servant. When he says at a certain point, the God opened my ears. And then you have this practice that is described, and it was part of the baptismal practice in the late antiquity, like in the times of St. Ambrose, which is in the New Testament, in the Evangel. I don't remember which part. There is this, when Jesus comes into the death, puts his fingers into his ears and says to him, Ephata, which in Aramaic means open yourself, open, which actually is the ability to listen. And if you read the mystical texts of the fathers of the church, you would notice that they say that truly we very often talk to God. We talk very much to God. But in fact, if we want to listen to God, the God speaks in the silence. So that is much of it. So I think what you said, this ability to listen, is the essence of our faith. Listen to God and to other people. So very true. Thank you. It's a very good comment. Indeed. Well, I don't know if anybody else wanted to mention something or say something as well, because I think it is very true, because you see, it's part of the testimony that we give, as you mentioned. So I think your understanding is, I think, very Franciscan. So I think probably not only your understanding. I think many of you think the same, similar way. Yes, yes, please.
Can I speak? Because you said the first order was the what was the meaning for the first order? You said the second order were prayer and the third order were Pentecost.
Oh, the beggars.
What? The beggars. Okay.
Obviously,
Thank
it's
you.
a saying, you know, don't take it too literally, but it's just to look at the very beginnings, you know, because obviously, you know, doesn't mean that the first order were the beggars, right?
Yeah.
But as you know, with the life of St. Francis, they were supposed to work, but if they were not able to get any means for life by work, they were supposed to go from home to home and beg in the name of the God, right? Which is very important, that in the name of the God.
Okay. Thank you. That's Thank
it's
you.
just, you know, a way to remember simplification is not always a good way, but sometimes in order to understand certain things, it's good to simplify certain meanings about the identity of the orders, with understanding that simplification obviously reduces some meanings, but sometimes gives a point in mind, a good direction.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
But the second order, that's for the sisters, the Clarissa. Is it always only prayer?
Well, but no, not now, not necessarily. I think but they were created at the beginning as the order for contemplation, right? So it was more of the order, right? So that's why Saint Clare is a little bit of a different story, right?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Great. So I think I have given you something for reflection. I don't know if it was interesting enough. Maybe there was too much history. I'm sometimes worried that, when you talk too much, it's not always good. You also have to allow people to say something. But sometimes there are certain facts that it's good to mention. And we need to know the roots to understand who we are.
Yes, that's true. It was very good. We need to learn where we come from to
And
also to
also,
understand
Mhm.
what penitence means. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Sometimes people think penitence in Danish also it's the same word. While in Italian you have in plural and singular,
Yes.
meaning different things. But also in Danish as in English,
Mhm.
it's one word, one for
But
the penitence of making your body suffer, and
mhm.
the one of changing your inside, yeah, changing your way of
But
doing.
notice that there is also the John Paul II's encyclical letter
Mhm.
on the on penitence, and it is actually connected with a very important subject, which is also very difficult and makes a lot of difficulty to many people, which is the issue of confession. Which now we don't do it, although in the liturgy of the Mass we have the common confession, right, where we actually say that we
Yes,
regret the
yes.
sins, the formulas. But since the Irish monks, we have this private penitence and the private confession, and I think it's very well. It has to be understood that confession is not a way of punishing yourself. It is actually a way of reflecting of this metanoia, of reflection over your own activities, which you look at, and actually the change in your mind and in your heart that you want to be a better person and you don't want to make the mistakes you have made. And obviously part of the good confession is fact that you repay or that you pay or somehow redo what you have done wrong. Notice in the first rules, we also have it that before joining the Franciscans, you just have to pay all the money that you have taken from everybody else. Otherwise, you are not accepted, right? So I think this issue is also important. And I think this issue of love in the confession is very important. And notice to the point that there is this term in theology of the absolute love, which means that if there are certain situations in life when you cannot confess your sins with the priest, you can have the absolution solemnly by the love of God. But then the theology says that in the confession there are two attitudes. One which is of a lower value, which is the attitude that you confess because you are afraid for the consequences for the eternal life of what you have done. So you want to avoid the consequences, and that's why you confess. The better way is you confess because you know you sinned against the God, and you love God, and you know that sinning is wrong because of the love that the God has given to us by his death on the cross. And this is the perfect love, which is, and notice St. Paul says that we are saved not by our deeds. We are saved by our faith and love and by the offer of Christ. And in certain situations, like when you cannot have You can accept, for example, talk with the priest. In certain circumstances, when you are not objectively able to give confession, and yet you want to or you need, for some reasons, to accept the most holy body and the most holy blood, you can do it on the way of the absolute love. When you have absolute love to God, this love is going to give you absolution. Obviously, the condition is that then you confess at the next possible moment. But with that perfect love, actually, it is the grace of God. So love is the grace of God. So when you confess, you just cannot see confession as a punishment. You need to see confession as an opening to the grace of love. As Shema Israel, you'll start listening to the God and behave the way God tells you. But first you need to open your ears to listen to God. So that's the true confession. And that's the real penitence. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes, please.
Mm.
Yes, Knut.
In accordance to what you have been talking about, I've been thinking about the first reading of today from Ezekiel.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
About taking care of the lost sheep.
Yes.
And we very often let the sheep run away instead of taking care of them.
Yes.
Here the prophets were mentioned, but it's just as well as us. We are too easy at letting people run away, even they are hurt.
Yes.
Instead of taking care of them.
Yes, we should, but we also have to. I agree with you, but we had a discussion, and I remember when I served in Norway, there was maybe I told you there was Polish nuncius at that time, Archbishop Nowacki, and we very often talked, and he said to me, yes, of course, and this is also the rule in when we accept people into Franciscan order. We have to look at the other biblical picture. Of course, we need to take care of every sheep that goes away. We need to come with love and understanding and bring them back, try to bring them back. But at a certain point, notice at this moment when a young man came to Jesus and asked him what to do to be perfect. And Jesus said to him, follow the commandments. And he said, yes, that's what I do. Yes, I want to be more perfect. Okay, then sell everything you have and follow me. And he was immediately sad and he said, no, that's too much for me. And notice, Jesus was not running after him saying, no, don't worry. No, you don't need to sell anything. Just sell half of it, No. If you want to be perfect, you need to accept in integrity entirely the love of God. And it is an obligation. Yes, that is true. You don't do it immediately. You have to mature to that. You grow, you develop yourself all your life, and until you maybe become saint or maybe not. But sainthood doesn't come just like with one deed. No. If we look at this Maximilian Kolbe, as I said, his sacrifice, it was not just a second. He prepared himself for that sacrifice many, many years before. And his sainthood was growing in him only until this last test. That was the test which made him saint. Yeah, so I think that's how it is. So yes, I would say, and what I think is very often the problem with not the fact that people sin, because we cannot look at us as perfect, because Perfect is the Cathars had. That's the Cathars would have. Then they were perfectissimi. You know, they thought they were perfect. They were not sinning. No, 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 no. We all sin. The problem is that in God we find penitence, and God gives us grace and absolution from our sins. And the issue is to be honest with the God and not to make a compromise with the sin and say, go to the confession and say, oh, you know, maybe I sinned something, but it was not such a big sin, you know, many people sin, so I can live with it, you know, I can make a compromise, maybe I don't make it. It's better. I think the issue with the faith is the fullness. So when you come as a penitent, you change your mind, you give yourself to God in fullness. And even if you declare or you want not to sin anymore, and yet you sin because you fall like everybody, that's okay. But the grace is given to you only when you're open entirely to the God. And you make this decision not to sin again, even if you are unable to fulfill it. But you have this will. And I think the will in our mind is the most important people. The most important issue, because even in our most the first prayer that we say, we have thy will, which means that the essence is the will. And if we have this discussion, you know, with fathers of the church on the monothelism, one will or two wills, you know, all that, you would just notice that will is the most important thing. And the discussion with monothelism was actually solved that the will of Jesus having two natures, not separate, but as one, human and godly nature, and had two wills, human will and God's will. But the human will was entirely subject to the God's will. But that's an act of will. And that's the important thing. So it's not that it is subject by rule. It is subject, but you make your choice. As a human, you make your choice to accept the will of God and submit to the will of God. That is, if you want to read about it, it's an interesting part. It's the... there is a book, unfortunately, I have it in Polish. It is by Pope Benedict. And I have it in Polish as it is here. He made my saints. He made the short catecheses on the saints. And they were collected and there are different saints, very short texts on the fathers of the church. And the issue of monothelism is also dealt with the oh my God! Now my ability to remember things is worse and worse. Just let me see. That is the Saint, not Gregory. Ah, yes. That's the Maxim the Confessor. Maxim the Confessor. It's the saint of the he was the 7th or 8th century, 7th century, yes. Very interesting figure, Maxim the Confessor. And he actually was fighting the heresy of monothelism, and it is the essence of because okay, there will be a long discussion on the heresies, but it's interesting. If you have some time, try to read something about him, and then the will in Jesus, whether it's one will or two wills, and he proposed argument that being two natures, not separate but mixed, there is no way of having one will. Two natures means two wills, but it means that's what Saint Maxim said and proposed it, and he said with the fact that the human will is entirely, and in Jesus, entirely subject to the God will, the Father's will. Let's say the Father's will, right?
I have never thought about that of Jesus having two wills, yeah, one as a human and one as a
It's
God.
just like two natures.
Yeah, two natures, two wills, yeah.
But you see, this is if you look, that's the whole theology of the body of John Paul II,
yes.
and then the whole discussions with many of the heresies who actually do not accept the incarnation. It's about the essence of incarnation. The incarnation has effects or consequences, and these consequences is two natures and two wills. But the issue is not two separate natures and two separate wills, not separate, but mixed in such a way that they conform into one, just like, you know, the persons of the Holy Trinity. We have in our credo, we have this word homooustios, which is of one essence.
One essence.
So here's the same. Two wills, but in fact, human will entirely subject to the God's will.
Very interesting.
But by choice. And the argument from Saint Maxim is the moment before the acceptance of the suffering by Christ, when Jesus actually is on the mountain and has the blood coming with his sweat.
Well, that's true.
And he says that this is when the human will is actually becoming submitted to the will. And then Jesus says, it's not, it's your will. Thy will be done.
Not mine.
And that's precisely the essence of, and that is the direction for us.
Interesting. Cool.
That's why, you see, Franciscanism is not easy, and I think Christianity is not easy. It is a religion that requires certain maturity and certain growth.
Very interesting.
Okay. Too many issues, I think. We have started with too many issues, I think. Okay, I will not bother you then with too much thinking, but I think I have inspired you to further reading if you have a chance and possibility. Yes.
Any other comments? Or yes,
anything. If you, obviously, I'm yours. If you would like to ask for something or say something.
Yes, it will be, well, I say thank you very much for your time, for all your expertise. And
my pleasure. If it serves you with something, obviously, I'm always happy to share in the fraternal way.
Yes. Well, I'll be writing to you about the next time.
Okay.
If you have time.
If you have patience enough, I will have time for you for sure. Don't worry. Actually, I enjoy very much when I see you. And, you know, it's as Knut said, it's always a pleasure to see people who come. And I think many people make a mistake of trying to, as St. Francis said, God gave me brothers. So you're being given the brothers as you're being given, not as you choose them, as they are. And I think this is the real joy, to be with us and accept everybody as he is. It's not that easy, but I think it's the source of great peace and joy. Well, so have a good night.
Have a good
Pax
night.
et bonum.
Thank
And
you.
until the
Pax
next
et-
time,
Thank
all the
you.
best to
Pax
you.
et
Thank you.
bonum.
Pax et bonum.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bon nuit, au revoir.
Bonjour.
Ciao,
Bye.
ciao.